Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm K.S. Narayan. I welcome you all on behalf of the IIT Alumni Center, Bengaluru, for the 52nd webinar. We have been conducting these webinars online since April 2020, just when the pandemic broke out. Ashok Kamath used to be the host along with Sushila Venkatraman. This has been really a successful series, and in case you have missed many of the wonderful webinars, it's available on our channel in the YouTube. Today we have the opportunity to hear Mr. Murali Narayanan. He is really an expert in all issues related to connectivity for emerging vehicles. He is an advisor to Dallas Venture Capital and to some of its portfolio companies since 2012. He is an innovator at heart and has a huge number of patents. He began his professional career at Bell Labs in the mid-70s. He has his MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Business and an MSE in Computer Information and Control Engineering from the University of Michigan. He did his B from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and a BSc in Physics from University of Madras. So after his career at Bell Labs in the mid-70s as a fault-tolerant computer architect and designer, Murali has gone on to head many senior management positions across several major companies such as Microsoft, besides leading many startups throughout his career. So until his recent retirement in 2018, Murali was with Planet Labs as an advisor to the company's CTO. He was also a consultant with AT&T, the IoT Solution Group, and drove the development of wireless communication capabilities to meet the needs of auto manufacturers in the for autonomous vehicles. I should also tell you another interesting tidbit about Murali. He is also an avid nature photographer, and many of his wonderful pictures on waterfalls, landscapes, cityscapes, and Seattle lifestyle is available on the internet. And moderating this seminar is Dr. Arjun Jain, an adjunct faculty at Indian Institute of Science, with research interests in the area of human sensing and perception, computer vision, and machine learning. Arjun received his PhD in computer science from the Max Planck Institute for Informatics in Germany and worked with the 2020 Turing Award winner Jan Leken during his postdoc at NYU. He's part of the Theano development team and a contributor to Torch, both of which are widely used for deep learning. Arjun is a founder at Fast Code AI Private Limited. He has also co-founded Perceptive Code, a Silicon Valley startup that builds intelligence into automobiles. He has been very active in human sensing related industries. He served as a developer for Vita Digital's motion capture system. This system has been used in many feature films, and his work he's got the credit for his work in Steven Spielberg's The Adventures of Tintin in 2011. So we have a wonderful panel out here. Along with me is also Dr. Sushila Venkatraman of IITACB. So I encourage the audience to engage in discussions at regular intervals via the Q&A box and not the chat box. Okay. So I look forward to a wonderful evening. Over to you, Murali.
Thank you very much, Professor Narayanan, and also thanks to Professor Jain and Dr. Sushila and the IIT Alumni Center for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts on, let me share my screen, on how computing and communication technologies have and continue to help the auto industry to build better cars and also provide better safety to the drivers and as well as to others like pedestrians. So let's see. My slides do not shift. One second. Let us change. Let's see whether it works this time. Okay. Can you see the
yes.
slide changing?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So we are going to talk about use cases, automotive use cases that are enabled by bringing computing and communication capabilities to automobiles and their benefits. So that will be the main emphasis. We'll talk a little bit about technologies that are enabling these use cases, basically to set the context. So we won't be spending a lot of time on technologies, but the focus is mainly on use cases. And we will end the presentation with the roadmap where when you can expect some of these capabilities to be available. So those are the three topics that we are going to cover during this webinar. So in the 1960s is when computing started to have an impact on the telecommunication industry. Until then, all the telecommunication systems were based on mechanical switches to connect one phone to another one. And with the introduction of the electronic switching systems in the mid-60s, that computing elements, both hardware and very primitive software, were deployed in telecommunication systems to improve reliability, increase the cost efficiencies to offer compelling telecommunication solutions to the masses. And it took another 30 years before the the computing started to help automotive industry, mainly due to reliability requirements and cost requirements that were required to meet the needs of the auto industry. And in the early 90s, auto industry manufacturers started to incorporate electronic control units to drive various functions in the car, and they were all interconnected using, just like a local area network, a control area network bus that was built into these vehicles. And the number of ECUs over the years have increased from about 10, 15 to now to pretty close to 100 electronic control units that all are running on software, on intelligent devices. And also in the mid 90s, cellular technology was added to the vehicles to provide superior services. So another interesting aspect is that about 25 to 30 years ago, the three industries, the automotive, the telecom, and the computing, they all had different cultures in terms of risk-taking, in terms of importance to security, quality, and over the years, it's been fascinating that there is a convergence on the management styles and the cultures within these three very different industries. And that is very fascinating to have observed that in over the last 30 years. And now let's talk about the cost of electronic systems as a percentage of the total cost of a vehicle. In the 1970s, until 1970s, about the electronic systems contributed to about 5% of the cost of a car, mostly AM/FM radio and electronic controls for the headlights and things like that. And in the 90s, with the introduction of the electronic fuel injection and other capabilities, that the cost of the electronic systems contributed about 10% of the total cost of the car. And in the 1990s, with the introduction of airbags and automatic brake systems, that the cost of electronics inside the vehicles went up to about 15%. And with the introduction of telematics, that we'll talk about it later in this talk, that the cost raised up to 20% and higher. And 2010, with infotainment, with navigation systems and things like that, the costs have now moved up to 35%. And 2020, it's went up to, with advanced driver assistance systems, they are now in about the 40% range. And by 2030, when autonomous vehicles take over, notice that electronic systems will contribute about 50% of the cost of a car. So basically, by 2030, all these cars are basically networked computers that run on wheels. So let's now talk about the automotive use cases that computing and communications have brought to the vehicles. And for that, we need to talk about the fatalities. The last 10, 15 years, the US fatalities, accidents have contributed about 30,000 to between 30 and 38,000. And worldwide, it's about 1.3 million people who die every year due to accidents. In fact, what is interesting is that even in 2020, even though less people were driving on the road due to COVID, the fatalities increased. That's very interesting observation. And so both the industry and the government have always been concerned about safety. And so telematics became important starting in 1995 when cellular technology was added to vehicles. So when we talk about telematics, what do we mean? So they offer emergency services. So it's not really about prevention, but if there is an accident, how do you get help to that spot as fast as possible? So the emergency services became quite prevalent starting in 1995. So when there is an accident, when an airbag deploys, then you can immediately notify the police and notify the ambulance services as fast as possible. And also vehicle security became important. So if a car gets stolen and the car can be tracked remotely using GPS and can be remotely in a way controlled so that the car can be stopped and then retrieved. And remember, in the 1990s, there were no smartphones and navigation systems. So navigation assist was a very important capability that telematics offered, so that you can go and request for directions, and an operator would download into the car the navigation directions, and then the car then takes over and then navigates you to the destination. And over the years, these electronic systems have made the vehicles quite complex. And so that required operations and maintenance capabilities. So these are things that happen in the car behind the scenes, not visible to the consumer, but adds value to the vehicle to make it safer and ride more comfortable. So the first thing that you need to do in a car is that activation and provisioning. So this is very important. Take an example here of a BMW that manufactures a car in Germany, and sends it to Italy to a customer. So when a dealer turns on the car, it then uses the roaming network and connects to the BMW in Germany to get it authenticated. Yep, this car is supposed to be in Italy. And then the network operator, in this case, AT&T, then reprograms the SIM card inside the car so that the vehicle then starts to use the local network in Italy, in this case, Telecom Italia, for all the communications. So the activation is the very first thing that happens in a vehicle when it is started for the very first time at the destination. And so with that capability, now you can do remote diagnostics, so that if the BMW can do the diagnostics on the car at a dealership, or if the car breaks down, it can be done remotely. And because of all the complexities in the electronics and computing and in the cars, over-the-air updates become very, very important. You don't want to take the car back to a dealer for updating the software or the firmware in a vehicle. Now we do it, we take it for granted now in smartphones, but doing it on cars is a bit more challenging. So those things become very, very important. And again, infotainment started penetrating the auto industry in 2015, mostly with the Wi-Fi inside the car, so that if you have a tablet or a computer with just Wi-Fi capability without the cellular capability, you can use the vehicle's cellular system to provide the Wi-Fi connection. So it basically the car acts as a hotspot for all the computing elements inside the consumers will be using. Plus now you can do content streaming with and navigation assist, all those type of things. So these are the type of use cases that have been prevalent until now. So here is an example of how OnStar works. It's a telematic solution that OnStar introduced in 1996, and it is still prevalent today, and it has evolved over time. So when you get involved in an accident in a GM vehicle, so either you can press the button or an SOS button, or if an airbag deploys, the vehicle automatically connects you to a control center, to a customer care center, so that it sends the location information, and the operator can talk to you and make sure you are safe, and dispatch the ambulance, medical services, and the police to your spot. So the latency when an accident happens, when help gets dispatched, is under 2 minutes. So that's every second counts, and so this has saved a lot of lives over time. And it's been available since 1996 in North America and South America and parts of Middle East and in China. And I'm sure there are similar services in Europe offered by a variety of other manufacturers and service providers. So as of 2015, the GM-OnStar has handled about 390 million vehicle diagnostics. So if a car breaks down, they can remotely diagnose what the issues are. It has handled about 270 million turn-by-turn navigation. Now that has reduced because of all the intelligence in the car, navigation systems in the car. But from 1995 to about 2015, about 270 million requests were handled. Interestingly, about 12 million remote doors unlocked requests have been handled. People lock their cars with the keys inside, and then they have to call in GM to get the remote door, remotely unlock the door. And they handle about 5.5 million emergency services, accidents, car falling into a ditch, and things like that. So as we said, In 1995, all the cellular communications were all based on 2G, very low bandwidth. So the services that were offered in 1995 were rather limited. And it took 10 years for 3G to penetrate the auto industry. So it's about 2005 when 3G technology were incorporated. And it took an additional 10 years for 4G LTE to get into these vehicles. But now the trend is much faster. It's now from 4G to 5G. It's around 5 years. And so the telematic solutions have also evolved over time from 2G to over to 5G. And infotainment, operations, and maintenance services were added in 2010 because they required 3G bandwidth to make them effective. You cannot download massive amount of software using 2G technologies. They were not sufficient bandwidth, and it was exorbitantly expensive. And also in 2010, people started to worry about safety. It's not about just cure. That means an accident happened, people get notified, and help comes faster, but also for prevention. So they started pilots using what is called the dedicated short-range communications. DSRC pilot started in 2010, and also in 2015, very similar pilots were started using cellular technology. So cellular V2X became started to do pilots in 2015. So the rest of the talk is going to be focused on DSRC and cellular V2X, on how these technologies are going to help significantly improve the safety in the vehicles. As we said, 1.35 million people die every year due to auto accidents, both pedestrians, bicyclists, as well as occupants of vehicles. So these technologies are going to help significantly in reducing the accidents. So prevention is better than cure. Okay. So let's talk about DSRC. What is it? So it's a technology very similar to Wi-Fi. It is based on 802.11 PS and Peter. So the technologies are embedded, the Wi-Fi type of technology is embedded in cars. They handle short-range communications. So they all talk to each other. The cars can talk to each other, or the distance of about 100 to about 500, 600 meters. And they support vehicle-to-vehicle communication so that the cars can talk to each other, as well as the vehicles to the infrastructure like traffic lights and traffic signs, that the communications can happen. And basically, each vehicle sends safety messages at every 100 milliseconds, so 10 times a second. So messages between, I believe it's about between 80 bytes and about 150 bytes. And every message has in its payload its latitude and longitude, its location, its speed, its direction in which it's moving, the size of the car, and things like that. So around a variety of information is sent to all the vehicles nearby. So they're all communicating with each other. And so whenever the receivers are also, all the vehicles are also listening to all these communications in addition to sending information, so that if they see a threat, let us say if this car slams its brakes, so the car behind it knows that the car in the front has slammed its brakes, and it alerts the driver. And if it's an autonomous vehicle, that if it is, the vehicle can take control and apply the brakes without the driver having to intervene. And so the DSRC, the technology is very similar to how smartphones and computers to talk on the network. So they basically use a very similar protocol stack. So they use the TCP/IP to communicate, so they can do both non-safety applications and as well as safety applications. For safety applications, IEEE and the Society of Automotive Engineers have defined some enhancements to the basically TCP/IP protocol stack optimized for vehicle communications from both in terms of performance and in terms of security, which becomes very, very important. So let's talk about the DSRC-based safety use cases that you will start to see in the coming years. So we need to talk about accidents. So this is a clip from a CNN website as of March of this year. And there was a major accident on a Missouri interstate highway that involved an accident that involved about 30 to 50 vehicles and involved a few deaths. It's one accident. And this was in February, I believe, of this year, when there was an accident in Oregon, and there were about 100 vehicles involved in a massive pileup in the ice, and the cause was the ice on the roads, and involved a massive accident. And the highway was closed for, I think, about a day or a day and a half until all these vehicles were removed. And last week was in Pennsylvania. It was an 80 vehicle pileup. So this is due to a snow squall. A snow squall is when you lose visibility in a very, very short time. It's all, you can see the cars ahead of you, and then the next minute you can't see anything other than you can see maybe the hood of your vehicle and nothing else. So we are not talking about 2 or 3 cars involved in an accident, 1 or 2 people dying. We are talking about 50 to 100 cars involved in a single accident. Makes zero sense. And a lot of these type of accidents happen. Now I see it once every 2 weeks. Massive accidents. All could be avoided with very little investments in adding communication technologies in vehicles. So we talked about vehicle-to-vehicle communication in the previous slide. So these are the use cases: forward collision warning, emergency electronic brake lights. We'll talk about all these use cases in the subsequent slides. So the V2V use cases will really help in reducing these accidents. And then there are vehicle to infrastructure based use cases, like work zone warning, or warnings where near schools, when children are crossing roads, that how you can alert the drivers to slow down and reduce the accidents. Also, there can be road hazard warnings, especially in wintertime when the roads freeze, that you want to alert the drivers about so that they can slow down and the cars don't end up skidding like what happened in these accidents. And the third category are emergency vehicle preempt, is when you allow the emergency vehicles like ambulances and police vehicles to go cross over traffic junctions faster and safely. So let's talk about each one of these use cases. The V2V use case, the forward collision warning. Let's say a car is stopped on the highway here, broke down, and so the car communicates. So when a car is approaching, it gets alerted that the car has stopped, so that the drivers are alerted to slow down and stop. And an emergency electronic brake light is when, if there is a traffic jam here and this car applies the brakes, and so immediately it notifies the vehicles behind it that this car is significantly slowing down. So the DSRC technology then alerts these vehicles, and then if the drivers can then apply the brakes, or with the ADAS systems that the cars will automatically slow down, and so that you don't get one car doesn't hit the other cars. So the blind spot warning is when people try to change lanes. So when this car tries to come into this lane, if there is a car here that it's in its blind spot, the driver may not see, and so it alerts both the cars that the car is trying to change the lanes, and then the driver of that car is alerted to hey, don't change because there's a car in another blind spot. So do not pass warning is also another very, very important use case. A lot of accidents happen when a car here tries to overtake a truck, and then there's another car coming on the other side. And so when this car is traveling at about 100 kilometers, and this car is coming here at 100 kilometers, and at 100 kilometers, it takes, in 1 second, a car travels 28 meters, so about 25 meters or so. So if these cars are moving, relative speed is about 200 kilometers. So in 1 second, they are going at about 50 meters. So when a car overtakes here, and you can go and hit this car, and these accidents happen quite frequently in the United States and Europe. And so with the DSRC, that the driver can be alerted, hey, you're not going to overtake this vehicle at your speed based on the car that's coming here. So don't even try it. Another use case is an intersection collision warning, where there are two cars that are approaching this intersection, and there are buildings here so that you don't see the car coming in here. And so both the cars get alerted that at the speed that you are going, that you can get involved in an accident, slow down and stop. As I said before, the work zone injuries and fatalities are very, very high in Western countries. About 1,000 people die every year, where there are people are repairing the roads, and cars come at a very high speeds and go and hit these workers on the roads. And there are about 100,000 crashes every year in these work zone areas. And similarly, there are other areas, like when there are school zones where people tend to drive, don't tend to slow down, even though there are signs to slow down. People just really slow down and involved in accidents. So what happens now is that now what they are deploying in the United States are putting roadside units that uses technologies like DSRC, so that when there is a work zone, the driver is alerted that there's work zone, but there are people working here, slow down. And in cars with the ADAS capabilities, the cars will automatically slow down to minimize these types of accidents in the work zones. And road hazards. So there are sensors on these bridges where ice gets formed much earlier during winter time, and so cars have a tendency to slide and skid on bridges. And so now what they are doing now is that they are putting sensors on the road, that the sensors detect there is ice, and immediately a roadside unit will alert the vehicles that is approaching about a mile away that the road is going to be very slippery and start to slow down. Okay, we talked about the emergency vehicle preempt. This is when an emergency vehicle like an ambulance or a police vehicle that approaches an intersection, And immediately the onboard equipment here in the vehicle will communicate with the roadside unit that controls the traffic lights, so that the traffic lights immediately switches to red, so that the cars on these crossroads are immediately stopped, and all the cars are alerted that there is an emergency vehicle coming in, and so they can slow down and move to the side and allow these vehicles to go across safely through the intersection. So this emergency vehicle preemptive solution is now being deployed in United States. Okay, and the DSRC technology can be, some of these safety use cases can be extended using cellular. So one reason is that DSRC is basically limited by range. So the communication limit is about 500 to 800 meters, depending on the weather and other conditions. That if you want to alert vehicles that are farther away, you can use cellular. So you can extend the range where basically for even notifications like accidents, and if there's slippery roads, then you can notify the vehicles way in advance that, hey, be careful. So here is a pilot that that I managed in 2016 with AT&T, Delphi, and Ford. This is about broadcasting notifications within an area of relevance, and we'll talk about what an area of relevance is, for vehicles to receive these notifications and take appropriate action. So the use cases are, cars get involved in an accident, or there is a hazard road conditions. So what we did was we worked with Delphi and Ford to put DSRC and LTE radios in Ford cars, and Delphi and Ford developed applications that ran on these cars, that if these cars got involved in an accident, they communicate over DSRC, and when they get involved in an accident or they identify the hazard road condition, they, over LTE, they notify the cellular network and comes to an AT&T traffic management system. Then it collects the information, location, and the type of an event, and then determines the area of relevance. Who should I notify about this incident? And it's that information over to a cell broadcast center. And so the cell broadcast center will send information through the relevant base stations so that the cars are then notified and they can take an action. So if there is an accident on a road here, and when a car about a mile or mile and a half knows that there is an accident that has just happened, and that the navigation system in that car can reroute the vehicle to avoid this accident, or to alert saying that hey, the road hazard road conditions start to slow down. Be prepared. So this can be deployed nationwide. So through an AT&T traffic management system, and also can notify a smart city control center, so that when an accident happens, immediately we can notify the police and notify the ambulance that an event has occurred. So this was a trial that was done by integrating a DSRC technology along with cellular technology to provide superior experience to vehicles. So we talk about the DSRC limitations. We talked about its short range, and it has limited evolution. It's based on 802.11, and there's not that much opportunity to improve the technology to meet the needs of autonomous vehicles, and also requires very high infrastructure costs, because of the short range. You need to have, if you want to have a nationwide coverage, you need to have a massive number of roadside infrastructure equipment to provide all the networking coverage. So the cost gets exorbitantly expensive. And the automakers are migrating to cellular anyway, because all these cars have cellular technology built in for other applications. So having both the DSRC and cellular start to increase the cost of the vehicle. And so having cellular technology that provides both short range and long range communication capabilities in the car becomes more important. So let us stop here for Q&As. And from now, we are going to talk about cellular technologies and what sort of use cases that is going to bring to these vehicles in the future. Professor Arjun Jain, you want to? I don't know what the questions that are being asked, so I don't.
Yeah, so Krishnan and Sharath have asked, and Soumya have asked a few interesting questions, and maybe I'll summarize a few and connect a few together and so on. So Krishnan asks about the power requirements of DSRC, and he wonders if all these, so if you, for DSRC, you need to have a IoT APN connect, and do they need then, IoT SIMs? So do you want to answer this? And then I can maybe read out the next few questions.
Yeah, it doesn't, the DSRC, capability by itself does not require a SIM card. But the cards are programmed when they come out of the factory. Remember, security is very important. You don't want some random guy standing on a highway and transmitting the data over this network. So there is a lot of authenticating capabilities that are built into the vehicles when they come out of the factory. Okay, but when we move to 5G, when cellular V2X happens, yes, the SIM cards have the capabilities already incorporated into the devices with all those secure elements built in, so that all the communications between cars get authenticated constantly. Every BSM message gets authenticated by both of them, so that the receiver knows that the transmission device is legitimate. Good question.
I hope that answers the question, Krishnan. So he also asks, how do they connect with legacy cars? So is there a communication standard which enables DSRC to connect with legacy vehicles which do not have DSRC?
No. No.
And then,
so that is the reason that there are other alternate the sensors that are available. So today, if you look at ADAS, they don't use DSRC. They use cameras, LiDARs, and things like that to detect what the cars around you are doing to slow down. So like ADAS systems use other technologies other than radio technologies today. Yes, you cannot, DSRC cars can only talk to other cars that have DSRC. So the challenges that the automotive industry has today is just like fax machines in the 80s and 90s. What good is a fax machine if you can't send to a person who does not have a fax machine? So those issues remain, but those issues will go away in the coming years.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I had the same question myself, so I'm sure others would also have had the same. So now Sharad asks, what percentage of these road vehicles, if equipped with DSRC and V2X capabilities, would have a significant impact on road safety?
Good question. It varies from country to country, and in United States, cars get replaced every 7 years. I believe is the average. So it's going to take time. And people are looking at aftermarket products, whether like cellular V2X can be added aftermarket. But my feeling is that it will be around 2030 when there will be sufficient deployment in Western countries for this to be effective. It's going to be 2025 to 2030. By that time, you will find out about 50% of the vehicles will be fitted with cellular V2X technologies at the rate at which things are progressing right now. But remember that there are other technologies too. So cellular is one technology. There are other sensors that will get deployed, like cameras and lidars and things like that. So between all of them, by 2030, you should be in good shape.
Thank you. We have two more questions, so maybe we'll take both of them. Soumya asks, how do these private initiatives, such as the one you mentioned, AT&T Ford Delphi, integrate with public programs, say the California Highway Safety Program, which have similar elements like V2I and V2V, like lane departure warning? How do these standards work out, especially with respect to autonomous communication?
Excellent question. Yes. That the communication, the interaction between telecom providers, government entities, and auto manufacturers have significantly increased in the last 5 years. We worked very closely with California, jointly with Qualcomm. Qualcomm is very active in this area with the government entities, and AT&T and Verizon have huge investments. $billion investments with the state, city, and federal governments in terms of security, and not just for roads. It's for other things, firefighting, forest fires, and so amount of communication work that is going on. There's spectrum that is allocated, dedicated spectrum allocated to government functions. So the smart city programs. And AT&T has maybe thousands of people working on basically to meet the needs of government organizations to provide communication for all these type of safety solutions.
Thank you. So there's one new question, so I'll just read both the questions out together. So Nikunj wonders about vulnerability aspects of DSRC, since it's a network-based protocol and you send essentially packets over some network. And Rahul says, wouldn't technologies like radar and LiDAR used for ADAS actually make DSRC obsolete? And is there a need for both of them to coexist?
Yeah, the DSRC will become obsolete because cellular V2X will take over. But all these sensors have got their pros and cons. We will talk about it at a later slide, but let me quickly answer it here. Is that when the visibility is very low, okay, cameras become less efficient, and the range of cellular V2X can be easily be about a mile. Okay, and so the cameras may not be able to see a mile ahead of what's going on, and so distance, the weather conditions all have different type of impact on these types of sensors. So vehicles will use multiple sensors. They will all coexist. To the accuracy requirements are very, very high. 95% or 98% accuracy is not good enough. You need 5 nines accuracy for these type of systems to be reliability requirements are very, very tight. So you will need multiple sensors in a very cost-efficient manner to all work together and combine all their information with AI software to provide these types of services. So yeah, the DSRC will go away, but cellular V2X will happen along with LiDAR and cameras and radar to provide these services.
Great. So at this point, I think we can move on with the talk, and we can come back to questions towards the end of the session if there are.
Now let's talk about cellular to vehicle to everything. So in short, CV2X. So it's basically, as we said, it's all based on cellular protocols. And they offer both vehicle to vehicle and also vehicle to infrastructure, as well as to vehicle to vulnerable road users. The VRU is another term that the industry uses now. So that includes vehicle to pedestrians, vehicle to bicyclists that use the same technology for communication between all these cast of characters to make it safer. So let's look at expected benefits. Improved road safety. As we said, about 1.2 to 1.3 million people die worldwide every year. And in the US, the traffic congestion basically uses an additional 3 billion gallons of gas every year. That is huge. And all these vehicles contribute about 14% to global warming. So with technologies like cellular V2X, that all these things can be improved. But let me also make an editorial comment. Still, the best way to reduce accidents, make people more productive, and improve global warming is to drive only when it's necessary. So prevention is better than cure. That these things will definitely help, but at the same time, we have to take initiative on our own to reduce travel using new technologies to improve the quality of life. So let's talk about why cellular. Okay, the installed base is growing. Today, there are 200 million vehicles that are connected using a combination of 3G and 4G LTE technology. Or by 2035, it will reach pretty close to more than about a 3/4 billion vehicles will have connectivity. And 5G AA, which is a 5G Automotive Association, consisting of people from automotive industry, computing and telecommunication industries, and government organizations, the 5G AA predicts that 20% of the vehicles will be 5G enabled. I'm skeptical. I think it will be about 2026, 2027, when 20% of the vehicles will be 5G enabled at the rate at which the 5G is being deployed. And cellular has a well-established ecosystems and standards. And we'll talk about the standards in subsequent slides. Okay, using leveraging the existing infrastructure. As we said in DSRC, that the infrastructure costs are exorbitant, but cellular already has an infrastructure already built in and growing for communications with smartphones and other things. So you're leveraging existing infrastructure. So incremental cost to provide these services for V2X is relatively small. And also very secure and supports a broad range of use cases and business models. Business models are very important because these vehicles will be communicating to provide different services. So the question is, who's going to pay for all these things? So if you're going to be using it for infotainment, for Wi-Fi and things like that, the consumer will be billed for it. But if it is going to do over-the-air software update, remote diagnostics, and things like that, the auto manufacturer will be paying for it. And if it is for a safety application, a local and the city government will end up paying for it. So, same SIM card, different use cases, different people who pay for all those services. So, the cellular provides capabilities to offer a variety of business models to meet the various needs. So let's talk a little bit about the technology on how the 5G is different from the currently what you have experienced over the last 10, 15 years. So if you see that the 2G and 4G basically operate in 700 megahertz and to 2.6 gigahertz. In some countries, they operate up to 3.4 gigahertz. That's the frequency range that they operate in. So why do they operate in those frequencies? So they provide longer range. So the number of base stations that you need is rather limited. You don't need, in rural areas, you need less number of base stations to cover a very, very broad area. And at those frequencies, 700 to 2.6 gigahertz, it's a good in-building penetration. So when you are inside a building, you can get good cell phone coverage. But the disadvantage of that is that you have a lower bandwidth and capacity. But if you look at 5G, 5G operates not only in these frequencies that the 2G through the 4G operate, but also they operate in what is called the millimeter wave range. That is in the 24 to 30 gigahertz. Okay. So the latest iPhone from Apple, the iPhone 13, and the equivalent device from Samsung Galaxy, they do support the millimeter wave technologies. So they are very complementary. The millimeter wave technology to the 700 to 2.6 gigahertz. So range is very short. Okay, very short range. So it will go up to maybe about a kilometer or so. While this this cell phone can the 2G through 4G can comfortably go through 10, 15 kilometers. Very poor in-building penetration. So you can't use the 5G millimeter wave technology inside buildings and communicate with a base station that's outside. But the advantage is it's a very high bandwidth and capacity, massive. It's about 10 to 50 times more bandwidth than you will get out compared to even 4G. So very, very complementary technologies, and by blending both of them together, you can have some very cool use cases. So let's talk a little bit about the 4G versus 5G in terms of the technological capabilities. So the latency will be less. Today, I think on 5G, what I've seen are that the latencies are in the 5 to 10, and in the 4G, they are in the 30 to 40. So the 5G is about twice or three times as fast. But over time, in the next few years, you will see that the latency gets very, very small. So when you click on a website, or if you want to do a video streaming, the video streaming will start to happen pretty instantly. Remember, there are other bottlenecks, not just on the network. Then there could be bottlenecks elsewhere in the server and the content distribution servers and things like that. But on the network side, the latencies will be significantly reduced. And also another thing is spectral efficiency. So that means how many bits of data that you are pushing at for every hertz. So the 4G does at about 15 bits per second per hertz. And so the 5G will be about 50% more efficient, so that you will be able to push 50% more bits with 5G compared to 4G, assuming you get the same channel bandwidth. So on an uplink, the one that I told you is about downlink. That's when you get the content from the network to the device. The other way, in the 4G, the uplink, now today you can do about 3 bits per second upload, but on 5G, the upload speeds can be as fast as the download speeds. And frequency spectrum we talked about. And connectivity density is also very important. With 4G, you can have about, within a square kilometers, you can have about 100,000 devices. With 5G, you can have about 1 million devices. It becomes very, very important when you have IoT devices that will become prevalent in the coming years. So if you look at the different opportunities with 5G, when you use the 24 gigahertz millimeter wave band, you can use them for very high speed, high quality content delivery on outdoor venues. So let's say you're watching a cricket match or a soccer match, you'll be able to view simultaneously from different camera angles at the same time, literally in real time, with very, very low latency. So you can watch live, and you can watch different angles, different viewing angles from different cameras simultaneously in outdoor vehicles, because now you are pushing massive amount of video streaming into devices. And vehicles will use millimeter wave to communicate with traffic signs. So you can do software updates and high quality, literally real time mapping information into vehicles very fast when a car goes through an intersection. And smart cities, with all the current LTE type of capabilities, that you can continue to see additional services appearing. And in the home, you will start to see internet access instead of cables. Now you can use like you can put a dish and have 5G, use 5G to have internet, high bandwidth internet communications to your home. So to do all these things, cellular V2X provides 2 complementary transmission modes. One is what is called a PC5 interface. It's very much like DSRC. It is basically a vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So even LTE 4G has that capability, but today, nobody has turned that on. On your smartphone, you can do, even though the capability is available on the chipset, the mobile operators have not turned on the capability. You can use LTE for a device-to-device communication that you can do. So similarly, they have been enhanced, what is called a PC5 interface. Now with that on 4G and also on 5G, you will have a short-range communications, which is slightly superior to DSRC. There is always a debate between DSRC people and cellular people like VHS and Betamax, but for a number of reasons, cellular will take over. But they have all the same, very similar capabilities. Doesn't require a base station, doesn't require a network operator for this PC5 communication to happen. So basically they will be, you can use all the DSRC use cases that we talked about will migrate. And the way the protocols are defined such a way that all the DSRC at the application level, all those things can be made to work here with no changes. And then cellular offers a UU interface, which is very similar to how smartphones work today over cellular network. So they provide network communication They provide both the broadcast capability and as well as unicast messages from vehicles to vehicles. So a vehicle can communicate to another vehicle over the or a local base station, and it could be a roadside network. This could be a traffic sign, a traffic light with a cellular system built into it, and they can communicate with vehicles that are farther away. So where there is latency tolerant use cases like event notification that we talked about, the AT&T Delphi Ford, the proof of concept, those type of applications can be implemented over the UU interface. So let's talk about the various communications. We talked about the V2I, that the car talking to a traffic light. Or this could be a roadside warning that, hey, go slow, there are people working on the road. So these things are being deployed now, V2I. And if you have an Audi, I think it is A4 and Q7, and if you happen to be in Las Vegas, and if you are when you are entering in an intersection, the vehicle will alert you, hey, relax, because you're not going to cross this traffic light. It's going to be red by the time you reach the intersection. So you can slow down. And it will also tell you when the light's going to turn green. So those things are happening today. And the emergency vehicle preempt that we talked before are being deployed today in certain markets. And it's going to take a decade for this to be deployed widely. In United States, there are about 6 million intersections. So this is not going to happen. Unlike smartphones, where you can distribute the smartphones to 1 million people in a month, this is going to take years. It's going to take 10, 15 years for these things to be deployed, but deployments have started. The V2V using the PC5 communication will start to be deployed in 2024, 2025 timeframe. Even though this capability is available with LTE in 4G, auto manufacturers are waiting for 5G to incorporate all these things to be deployed. And so it'll be about 2020, 24, 2025 for these things to happen. And now the V2N services are happening today. So you can do the communication to the clouds for software updates and infotainment, Wi-Fi, all those type of things are happening. But once this V2V capabilities are deployed, now the V2N, vehicle to vehicle, over the network can also happen. And it will be 2027 when the V2P starts to take over. That is when use cases like when a pedestrian is going to cross the road, the vehicles are alerted, hey, the pedestrian is crossing, stop. And if it's an autonomous vehicle, the autonomous will take its own action. So between now, things will are starting now with V2I and V2N. Those things are available now. The V2V will happen in 2025 timeframe, and V2P will happen in 2027 timeframe in the US. And the rest of the world will lag behind maybe a year or two from this. So all the DSRC use cases are all relevant, will happen with cellular V2X. And all the vehicle operations management, telematics, or their software updates, all of those things will continue to happen. And there'll be some new access control use cases that will start to appear, mostly B2I and B2N based. For example, when you're entering your home, when you're driving and coming in, and your garage will authenticate with the vehicle, and the garage door will automatically open when you get in, and when you leave, garage door will close. I remember about 5 years ago that my family and I drive, and we are about 50 miles away from our home, and then my wife asks, "Hey, did we close the garage?" And now we don't have to worry about all those types of things, and then it'll be a lot of convenience. Access control, when you go into garages, when you're going into your office, the car will be authenticated, and the gates will open. All those type of things will start to happen more widespread. And ADAS, autonomous vehicles, will be enabled by using Cellular V2X, in addition to the existing technologies like LiDAR and cameras will happen. There's be a lot of communication that can go on between vehicles to make these things happen. Platooning is a very interesting use case. And in fact, I think platooning will happen in the US much earlier, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years. When trucks move from one city to another city, they will go like train today. So there'll be one driver in one truck, and the trucks behind will not have any drivers, and will follow the first leading vehicle. So it's called the platooning, and so that will significantly improve the efficiency of distribution of transportation of goods, and significantly reduce the transportation cost also. Less number of drivers, more efficient driving. And platooning can also happen in cars. So if you are driving from one city to another city, people can join the platoon, leave the platoon, and they can all go at a constant speed, reducing the congestion. So this is going to be something that will happen in fleet vehicles much sooner than in cars. So we'll talk about levels of automation. So SAE has defined these 5 levels of automation, all the way from current cars with no automation, with level 1 with just a cruise control, level 2 through level 3, various levels of ADAS. A lot of cars in the US are operating at level 2. Say Tesla is operating now at level 3. Some of the rest of the American vehicles, I believe Mercedes-Benz is operating. All these EVs are starting to operate at level 3, and level 4 is will happen in the next 4 or 5 years. When between 3 to 5 is the level of driver involvement. The 5 is the ultimate, when you don't need a driver, you don't need steering wheels, nothing. Will happen in the 30s, maybe in the next 10 to 15 years. So, but this is how we are evolving, and Cellular V2X and the other LiDAR and cameras will all help to make these things happen. So here is a quick roadmap. We already talked about it, so let me quickly go through it. I call it as an estimate because these are my opinions based on the 5G AA roadmap to date. I know that they are updating the roadmap, but at the same time, you need to remember 2 things about roadmaps. Roadmaps without geography makes no sense. When I say 2025, you don't assume that 2025 it will magically appear all over the world like phones appear today. It will take time. because of number of players that are involved in this space are a lot, and it requires government approvals, frequency allocations, and the number of actors in this game are fairly complex and will take time. So most treat these things as ranges, what I'm going to give you. So this is something, the 3GPP is an organization that defines these standards globally. Literally every country is represented, and Release 15 came out in 2018 that defined the standard for 5G. That's what the today's 5G enabled phones use. And 2020 is when the Release 16 went out. That's when all the V2X capabilities into 5G were specified. And they will evolve to Release 17. I believe Release 17 is going out very soon, or maybe it might have gone out last month. And 17 and 18, they provide additional capabilities to V2X, and with all the millimeter wave capabilities to support the needs of autonomous vehicles. So these dates are pretty locked up. These 3GPP does a terrific job of hitting their dates, and they have a very disciplined organization global organization that puts all these standards together. Pretty impressive team of people. And you will see the V2I use cases that I talked about, local hazard notifications, traffic information, that is starting to happen now and will continue to happen over the years. All the V2V safety, like the DSRC use cases that we talked about, will start to happen in 2024. My gut feel says that it will be about 2025-ish when these things will start to be broadly deployed. And then for the things like autonomous vehicle support, auto valet parking, platooning, and things like that will happen in 2025-ish, and all the high definition sensor sharing and all will happen in 27 and 2028 timeframe. So it'll be around the early 2030s when all these things will all come together to make autonomous vehicles very broadly deployed. Okay, Gartner Group puts out this, what they call it as the hype cycle. They put out for every technology, where just like Jeffrey Moore talked about technology life cycle, all these new technologies, when they go through various cycles, all the way from innovation through high expectations and then delusionment, and then reality strikes in, and then they get broadly deployed. So a lot of the technologies that we have talked about are all in various stages of this this hype cycle. So connected cars are now reaching the plateau of productivity. As I said, today there are about 250 million cars that have got cellularly connected. So that is right over here. Electric vehicles are starting to happen. So so they are moving up the slope of enlightenment. So you will start to see that happening in the near future. I would say the over-the-air update has moved a little bit faster. I would say the over-the-air update now is over here, and it's now become quite common in vehicles. And vehicle-to-vehicle communication is, the DSRC has been being tested for more than 10 years. Hasn't moved much. They have done a lot of tests. Technology has been proven, but there's not been that much acceptance for various reasons. But so it's been stuck here for a long time. So that's why it is, for it to reach it's going to be, to reach up to this point, it's going to take another, about 4 or 5 years. And 5G will move very, very fast. It's up here, expectations are very high, and it will cross over to the plateau of productivity in 2 to 3 years. So we have already talked about all these alternate technologies. Cameras, low cost, exist today, but during adverse weather, you will have challenges. Also, distance will be an issue, that unlike cellular technology that can alert somebody about half a mile away, the range of all these cameras are rather limited. And the radar can handle all these moving objects better. But object recognitions become a challenge. I think Professor Jain can give you much better insights than me on this topic. And on LiDAR, it's weather resistant, but it's it's pretty expensive to be deployed. But over time, all these technologies will coexist, and auto manufacturers will leverage all of them to provide an optimum solution, both from a cost perspective and reliability and performance. As I said, you need 5 nines accuracy and performance for these things to have a positive impact. So we have talked about all these key challenges. Very important is going to be security. And we have to make sure these systems are not easily hacked. I am reminded of these hacking of Chrysler cars in 2015. That was just about 5 years ago. And you can now go to YouTube and you can see the actual video of this hack. And it's fascinating. And auto manufacturers got religion, started hiring security people in software, and these things are not, if the autonomous vehicle gets hacked, it can have very, very bad implications. So hacking is something that need to be very carefully handled and managed. As I said, computing, communications, and automotive, all these industries are converging, and these vehicles are nothing but highly networked, sophisticated computers that happen to have wheels. And we have to make sure there are no false messaging, injections. There are rogue elements that are on the roads transmitting false messages, and that these cars pick up and act on it, can be dangerous. Privacy, another issue. Okay, unauthorized tracking, because your vehicles will get tracked by a lot of organizations. So we need to be very careful in terms of privacy and make sure that the information doesn't get abused. Everything now can be tracked. So you can know that the car keeps a history of what speed that you have been going in. Insurance companies would know that and can take action. And if you get involved in an accident, and if the insurance companies know that you are going above the speed limit, they can tell you that I'm not going to pay for it. All sorts of things can happen. Okay, and so the broad adoption is going to be still a challenge. Vehicles need to be deployed with all these technologies, and you need compelling applications, and public needs to have confidence. If people are not confident, they're not going to buy these things, or even if they buy it, they will turn off these features. So, I'm reminded that, 30 years ago, people were, even today, a lot of people disable their seatbelts. They don't put on seatbelts. A lot of that happened because of people not using these capabilities. So public confidence will be a very important factor in acceptance of all these technologies. So let me end the presentation with some recognition. You can find a lot of technical information in the 3GPP. It's very valuable. It's not just for the techies. You can get a pretty good overview of what's going on with these technologies. 5GA has put together a terrific website with a lot of information. So all the things that I presented, I grabbed it out of this 5GA website, and I've been very lucky to have worked with some amazing people from a variety of companies in all the three industries that we talked about, of Audi, Ford, Nokia, Qualcomm. This is just a small set of people, of companies that I worked with, and a lot of them are the founders or on the board of 5GAA, and these are the people who are driving the future of all those communication capabilities, and that you will see the impact in the coming years. So I would like to take this opportunity to recognize that what I've learned from them and what I have contributed along with them to make all these things happen. So I stop here, and what time is it? So we are close to my time. We are at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, we can do maybe a few questions, maybe one or two questions. So I had one question of mine, and I'll be grateful if you can throw some light on this. So I was wondering that when you talk about V2I, what is harder, to actually have more vehicles with this technology or to change infrastructure? I mean, you talk about some isolated instances such as Las Vegas, but then, and you also mentioned that you think this is going to be more available soon. So, I mean, will it be more of retrofitting? Would you have to change the hardware? I mean, how easy is this endeavor?
The retrofitting is going to be very, very difficult, and it's going to be very expensive. I don't, retrofitting will happen, but I don't expect that to be big. Do you see people adding, iOS device inside a car, an Android system in a head unit? No, most probably not. Infrastructure also is going to take a lot of money. Okay, as I said, there are 6 million intersections in the United States, and I'm sure there are much more in other countries. So the infrastructure is going to take infrastructure. It's going to take cars. They all need to come together. So and people are making investments. China and Taiwan, I think I would say they are a bit ahead of the United States. Infrastructure is being deployed right now. Trials are going on. They will go live earlier than the United States. Okay. Wow. And government, have taken initiatives. Different governments have got different priorities. And China, infrastructures have been a huge priority for a very long time. And so they're deploying these things quite fast. And they're very active in 5GA. Chinese companies are very active in 5GA. I worked with some amazing people from Huawei in 5GA and in 3GPP. And so that is, net result is that it's going to be expensive. It's going to take time, but will happen. Will happen by 2030. All these things will be deployed.
Great. So I think we've answered most of the questions, and I think we can thank Mr. Murali, and I will hand it over to Dr. Sushila.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Today was such an interesting journey into what we're going to see over the next decade, and the major transformation in the way vehicles will evolve. So thank you ever so much, Murali, for this fascinating narration. And Arjun, many, many thanks to you for being part of today's webinar. I know you do other work, and we hope we will have you on this webinar someday in the near future. So I just want to summarize a few key points from today's talk. From a time in the 70s when electronic systems formed 5% of the cost of the car, to an expected 50% or more by 2030. So that's the way cars have evolved. We saw the technologies that define how cars are turning into what Murali described as computers that just happen to be on wheels. We saw two technologies in fundamental technologies in depth. We saw the dedicated short-range communications, which is DSRC, and cellular, and basically vehicle to anything. And we looked at many, many use cases, but I think for us in India, probably the ability to have ambulances and emergency vehicles, actually we provided passage through the confusing traffic mess that in most of our cities would be a very welcome thing. And what that requires is basically integration with traffic lights and informing other vehicles around. I think what the other things that I personally would love are blind spot warnings and all sorts of collision warning, especially when there are multiple types of vehicles on our roads, including handcarts. But for me, a very good takeaway from today's talk was the fact that many accidents are avoidable if you put the right kinds of technologies in. And you mentioned that it doesn't take a whole lot of investment. So that was an important takeaway for me. For those, we looked at 5G and what 5G is going to do and the role that it's going to play in the connected vehicle. But for those who are not aware, there have been previous talks focused entirely on 5G. So please do go look for them in the IITACB YouTube channel. You'll find them there. So, and then finally, we looked at the various communication types between the vehicle and the infrastructure, the vehicle and the network, vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to the person. And the roadmap that we saw is probably going to take up to about 2027 to get to the vehicle to person. That's in the US, and the rest of the vehicle will follow, the rest of the world will follow thereafter, a couple of years or so. The applications such as safety and vehicle operations management, convenience access, etc., infotainment, and the role that these are going to play in the way we interact with the vehicles was also another very interesting part of today's story. The platooning of fleet vehicles, I thought, was again a very fascinating idea. And while we've been hearing about autonomous vehicles, and everybody is fascinated with it, right? We hear about it all the time. We see those little YouTube vehicles, videos, and all of us ask the question, how on earth is this going to work in Bangalore? But quite apart from that, it does seem to be becoming a reality. And I'm sure there will be adoptions that make sense to us here in India as well. We saw the V2X roadmap that Murali presented over this whole decade. But what is really going to matter is being able to manage the complexity that is involved in putting all of this together in a sensible manner. And of course, things like government approval and just managing the integration between a very large number of players who are going to need to get involved to make something like this work. All of this is going to define how soon and how successful all of these deployments are going to become. And lastly, we saw the Gartner hype cycle for smart mobility, and much of what we saw today in today's journey, a lot of those technologies fall in different parts of the hype cycle. So it's really anyone's guess how all of this is going to fall together and take us to that. But the autonomous vehicle does seem to be a reality that is somewhere in the foreseeable future. And with this, I would like to once again acknowledge and thank both Murali Narayanan and Dr. Arjun Jain for being part of today's webinar. And of course, to our audience for being here and for your questions. Obviously, they made a lot of sense, and it made the webinar all the more interesting. This webinar recording will be up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. Please do go look for it. And of course, we look forward to welcoming you all to our next webinar. And thank you very much. Good night and good day.
Thank you. Good night.